She had served coffee and peanuts on Flight 447 for 3 years, smiling at passengers and demonstrating safety procedures. When the man in 14C stood up with a weapon and announced, "This plane is under new management," the passengers screamed in terror. But flight attendant Sarah Chen calmly walked toward him and said, "Sir, you've made a serious mistake. I used to be the person they sent to stop people like you." Welcome to Hidden Legends. Before we begin this powerful story of courage, skill, and forgotten heroism, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us make sure they are. At 6:45 a.m. every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, Sarah Chen arrived at Denver International Airport to prepare for United Flight 447 to Los Angeles. The same routine she had followed for 3 years. Checking emergency equipment, reviewing passenger manifests, and ensuring the galley was properly stocked for the 2.5-hour flight. Sarah was 38 years old, with shoulder-length black hair always pulled back in a neat bun according to airline regulations, and hands that moved with practiced efficiency as she demonstrated safety procedures that most passengers ignored. Her smile was genuine, her service professional, and her manner so unremarkable that travelers saw exactly what they expected, just another flight attendant doing her job. What they didn't see was that Sarah Chen had spent 10 years as a Federal Air Marshal, flying undercover on high-risk routes throughout the Middle East, South America, and domestic flights flagged by intelligence agencies. She had been trained to identify threats from micro-expressions, to neutralize armed hijackers in confined spaces, and to land a commercial aircraft if both pilots were incapacitated. She had walked away from federal law enforcement when her partner Marcus was killed during a hijacking attempt over the Pacific. The bullet that took his life had been meant for her, fired by a terrorist who had somehow identified them both as air marshals. Sarah had completed that mission, saved 180 passengers, and submitted her resignation the same day. "I can't do this anymore," she had told Deputy Director Williams during her debriefing. "Every flight, every passenger could be the one that doesn't make it home." So Sarah Chen traded her concealed Sig Sauer for a beverage cart, her federal credentials for an airline uniform, and her high-stress surveillance missions for the simple peace of serving coffee at 35,000 feet. She found comfort in the routine, the same announcements, the same safety demonstrations, the predictable rhythm of commercial aviation. But some instincts never fade. Sarah still automatically profiled every passenger who boarded, still noted exit locations and potential weapons, still positioned herself where she could observe the maximum number of people with optimal response time. Old habits from years when a moment's inattention meant the difference between a safe landing and a national tragedy. Flight 447 on this particular Thursday morning carried 142 passengers and seemed no different from the hundreds Sarah had worked before. Business travelers heading to meetings, families visiting relatives, and the usual mix of personalities that filled commercial aircraft. Sarah performed her pre-flight safety demonstration, checked on passengers' comfort, and began the beverage service as they reached cruising altitude. She had no way of knowing that 3 men in different sections of the aircraft had boarded with ceramic weapons, fake identifications, and a plan that had been months in the making. At 10:47 a.m., 30 minutes into the flight, everything changed. The first sign of trouble came from the man in seat 14C, a thin, nervous passenger who had declined both beverages and snacks, spending the flight checking his watch and scanning the cabin. Sarah had noted him during boarding as a potential flight risk, someone whose behavior patterns suggested anxiety or ulterior motives. When she approached his row with the beverage cart, he stood up abruptly, revealing the ceramic knife he had concealed in a hollowed-out paperback novel. The weapon was professionally made, sharp enough to be lethal, but designed to pass through airport security undetected. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced in accented English, his voice carrying clearly through the cabin, "this aircraft is now under new management. Remain in your seats, and no one will be harmed." The reaction was immediate and predictable. Passengers screamed, some ducked below seat level, others pulled out phones to call loved ones before realizing the futility. Flight attendant Janet, working first class, froze in place holding a coffee pot, her training covering emergencies, but not armed takeovers. But Sarah's response was different. While other passengers panicked and Janet remained paralyzed, Sarah calmly secured the beverage cart, positioned herself for optimal tactical advantage, and began walking steadily toward the armed man. "Sir," she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had faced this exact scenario dozens of times before. "You've made a serious mistake. I used to be the person they sent to stop people like you." The hijacker's confident expression faltered slightly. This wasn't the terrified compliance he had expected from airline crew. The woman approaching him moved with the controlled precision of law enforcement, her eyes evaluating his weapon, stance, and positioning with professional assessment. "Stay back!" he commanded, raising the ceramic blade. "I will use this." Sarah continued her approach, noting his grip on the weapon, the tremor in his voice that indicated nerves rather than tactical experience, and most importantly, the fact that he was focused entirely on her instead of maintaining awareness of the cabin around him. That's when the second hijacker revealed himself. From seat 23A, another man stood up with an identical ceramic knife, this one larger and more confident in his movements. The plan was becoming clear. Multiple operatives positioned throughout the aircraft, coordinated timing, professional equipment. "You see," the first hijacker said, regaining some confidence as his partner appeared, "we are not alone, and you are just one woman." Sarah smiled slightly, the expression of someone who had heard similar threats from more dangerous people in more confined spaces. "Actually, that's exactly the problem. You're expecting just one woman, but I'm not just any woman." She had identified both visible threats, calculated the likelihood of additional operatives, and noted that neither hijacker had yet moved to secure the cockpit, suggesting either poor planning or incomplete execution of their strategy. More importantly, she had positioned herself where both men would have to turn their backs on sections of the cabin to maintain visual contact with her. "My name is Sarah Chen," she continued, still walking calmly forward. "Former Federal Air Marshal, badge number 2847, 10 years flying routes just like this one, stopping people just like you." The recognition hit both men simultaneously. Air marshals were legendary among hijacking crews, federal agents trained specifically for aircraft intervention, authorized to use deadly force, and equipped with specialized weapons and techniques designed for combat in pressurized cabins. But the revelation that worried them most was the calm professionalism in her voice. She wasn't bluffing or improvising. She was implementing a plan she had rehearsed hundreds of times. The moment of recognition gave Sarah the tactical advantage she needed. Both hijackers were now focused entirely on her, their weapons lowered slightly as they processed the implications of her identity. More importantly, they had revealed their positions and equipment without securing the cockpit or establishing control over the passenger cabin. "You're lying," the man in 14C said, but his voice carried uncertainty now. "Air marshals don't work as flight attendants." Sarah reached into her service apron and withdrew something that made both men step backward involuntarily. Her federal credentials, carried out of habit and regulation even after leaving the service. The badge was real, the identification current, and the authority it represented was unmistakable. "Former Air Marshal," she corrected, still moving toward them with the measured pace of someone in complete control. "Which means I know exactly how this is going to end." She had identified a third potential threat, a woman in seat 31B whose behavior patterns matched the other operatives, whose positioning suggested tactical coordination, and whose reaction to the initial hijacking had been observation rather than fear. But Sarah had also noted something the hijackers had missed in their planning. Flight 447 was a Tuesday morning departure, which meant it carried a significant number of off-duty law enforcement officers heading to Los Angeles for a federal training conference. She could identify at least 4 passengers whose posture, awareness levels, and reaction patterns suggested police or military backgrounds. "Here's what's going to happen," Sarah announced loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "These gentlemen are going to put down their weapons, return to their seats, and we're going to continue to Los Angeles where federal agents will be waiting to escort them off the aircraft." The hijacker in 23A laughed harshly. You think you can stop all of us alone? Sarah's smile widened slightly. Who said I was alone? That's when Detective Ray Morrison of Denver PD, sitting in seat 18D, stood up and identified himself, followed by Agent Lisa Park from the DEA in 27C. Then Sergeant Mike Torres, Army Reserve, from 12B. One by one, off-duty law enforcement officers throughout the cabin revealed themselves, creating a tactical nightmare for the hijackers. The man in 14C looked around at the growing number of armed professionals surrounding him, his confidence evaporating completely. What had been planned as a simple aircraft takeover had become a confrontation with more federal and local law enforcement than most criminals ever faced on the ground. This is impossible, he muttered. How did you know? Sarah finally reached his position, close enough to take action, but still maintaining the calm demeanor that had kept the situation from escalating to violence. Because this is what I do. This is what all of us do. We protect people. The third operative, the woman in 31B, had quietly returned to her seat and was attempting to blend in with terrified passengers. But Sarah had already signaled her location to Agent Park, who was moving into position with the smooth coordination of professionals who had trained for exactly this scenario. Now, Sarah continued, addressing all three hijackers, you have a choice. End this now, cooperate with federal authorities, and spend the rest of your lives in prison. Or find out what happens when you threaten 142 innocent people in front of a cabin full of law enforcement officers who take that personally. The ceramic knife in 14C's hand trembled slightly as he looked around at the faces of passengers who were no longer victims. They were witnesses to his defeat, protected by people who had made careers out of stopping exactly this kind of threat. The surrender was anticlimactic, but complete. Faced with multiple law enforcement officers, tactical disadvantage, and the clear expertise of someone who had defeated far more sophisticated hijacking attempts, the three operatives laid down their weapons without firing a shot or injuring a single passenger. Sarah coordinated the response with the same professional competence she had demonstrated during her federal career. The hijackers were secured, using flex cuffs from the aircraft's emergency equipment, their weapons confiscated, and their seats repositioned for optimal security during the remainder of the flight. How did you know they were planning this? Asked Detective Morrison as he helped secure the cabin. Sarah checked the restraints on the primary hijacker before answering. Same way you know when someone's carrying without a permit or Agent Park spots money laundering. Pattern recognition, threat assessment, behavioral analysis. 10 years of flying these routes, you learn to see what doesn't belong. She had noted the coordination in their boarding, the timing of their movements, the way they had positioned themselves for tactical advantage throughout the cabin. Most importantly, she had recognized the ceramic weapons, a signature of a specific terrorist training program she had encountered during her federal service. Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom, calm and professional. Ladies and gentlemen, we've had a brief security incident which has been resolved by our cabin crew and several off-duty law enforcement officers aboard the flight. We'll be continuing to Los Angeles where additional authorities will meet the aircraft. The passengers' reaction was a mixture of relief, admiration, and disbelief. Many approached Sarah personally to thank her, but her response was the same to each. Just doing my job. But you're a flight attendant now, pointed out Mrs. Williams from seat 8A, an elderly woman who had watched the entire incident with remarkable composure. Why did you risk yourself for us? Sarah finished stowing the emergency equipment and met the woman's eyes. Because it doesn't matter what uniform I wear or what badge I carry. My job is making sure everyone gets home safe. Agent Park, who had helped coordinate the response, pulled Sarah aside as they prepared for landing. The Bureau could use someone with your skills and experience. Have you ever considered coming back? Sarah looked out the window at the Los Angeles skyline, then around the cabin at passengers who were now chatting quietly, reading magazines, and returning to the normal activities of commercial flight. The crisis had passed, order was restored, and 142 people would be going home to their families that evening. "I appreciate the offer," she replied, "but I have the job I want. These flights, these passengers, they're my mission now, and I'm going to make sure they stay safe, one route at a time." As Flight 447 touched down at LAX, FBI agents were waiting to take custody of the hijackers. The incident would be classified, the passengers debriefed, and the threat neutralized. But for Sarah Chen, it was simply another day protecting people, whether that meant serving coffee or stopping hijackers. 3 weeks later, Sarah was back to her regular routine on Flight 447. The same announcements, the same safety demonstrations, the same beverage service that passengers had come to expect. But something had changed in the way people looked at her. The story had spread quietly through aviation circles, law enforcement networks, and among the passengers who had been aboard that Thursday morning. Not through media coverage, the incident remained classified, but through the kind of word-of-mouth recognition that authentic heroism generates. "Excuse me," said a young businessman in seat 12C. "Aren't you the flight attendant who stopped those hijackers last month?" Sarah finished pouring his coffee before answering. "I'm just a flight attendant, sir. Can I get you anything else?" But the other passengers within earshot smiled because they knew better. The woman serving their beverages had been featured in federal law enforcement training materials, had testified before congressional committees on aviation security, and had saved more lives at 35,000 feet than most people saved in entire careers. Captain Rodriguez, who had been flying with Sarah for 2 years, approached her during the layover in Los Angeles. "Sarah, I've been doing this job for 28 years, and I've never seen anything like what you did on that flight. The way you rid the situation, coordinated with those officers, kept everyone calm. That was textbook perfect." Sarah secured the galley equipment and checked the passenger manifest for the return flight. "Just good teamwork, Captain." We all did our jobs, but Rodriguez knew better. He had read the incident reports, spoken with the FBI agents who debriefed the hijackers, and learned about Sarah's federal career from Deputy Director Williams himself. The woman working his aircraft wasn't just any flight attendant. She was one of the most decorated air marshals in federal service, choosing to serve quietly rather than seeking recognition. "The airline wants to nominate you for a service award," he continued. "Maybe some media coverage, recognition for what you did." Sarah shook her head. "That's not why I do this job, Captain. I do it because people deserve to feel safe when they fly. Awards and publicity don't make flights safer. Training, preparation, and vigilance do." As passengers began boarding for the return flight to Denver, Sarah resumed her position at the aircraft door, greeting each traveler with the same professional courtesy she had shown for 3 years. But now, some passengers looked at her with new understanding. They saw not just a flight attendant, but someone who had chosen service over recognition, who had found meaning in ordinary work after extraordinary career, and who continued to protect people whether they knew it or not. A mother traveling with 2 young children stopped to shake Sarah's hand. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything you do." Sarah smiled, the same genuine expression she showed every passenger. "Thank you for flying with us today. I hope you have a pleasant flight." Because that's what real heroes do. They serve where they're needed most, whether that's stopping international terrorists or ensuring a child's first flight is memorable for the right reasons. They adapt their mission to their circumstances, but they never forget their core purpose: keeping people safe. Sarah Chen had found her place in the world, not behind a federal badge, but behind an airline uniform, making sure that every passenger who trusted her with their safety made it home to the people they loved. 6 months after the incident, Sarah received a letter that would change everything. It was from Emily Rodriguez, the 8-year-old daughter of Captain Rodriguez, who had heard her father talking about the brave flight attendant who had stopped the bad men on the airplane. "Dear Miss Sarah," the letter read in careful second-grade handwriting, "My daddy says you're a hero, but you don't like people to say that. I think you're like a superhero who wears a regular costume so nobody knows. When I grow up, I want to help people like you do. Can you teach me how to be brave?" Sarah read the letter twice, sitting in her small apartment with a cup of tea and the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had found exactly where she belonged. She had received commendations from the FBI, personal thanks from the Secretary of Homeland Security and offers to return to federal service at a higher grade than when she left. But this letter from a child who wanted to help people, this meant more than all the official recognition combined. She wrote back that same evening, explaining that being brave didn't mean not being scared. It meant doing the right thing even when you were afraid. She talked about the importance of training, preparation, and always being ready to help others. Most importantly, she told Emily that heroes come in all forms: teachers, doctors, police officers, firefighters, and yes, even flight attendants. 2 weeks later, Sarah was working Flight 447 when she noticed a familiar face in seat 23C, Deputy Director Williams, her former supervisor from the Federal Air Marshal Service. He was traveling under his own name, no covert identity, which meant this wasn't official business. During the beverage service, he quietly asked if they could speak privately. Sarah finished serving the first-class cabin, then joined him in the galley area where they could talk without being overheard. "Sarah," he began, "I wanted to speak with you personally about something. The incident last month has generated significant interest at the highest levels of government. The Secretary would like to offer you a position as Director of Aviation Security Training, developing programs based on your experience." Sarah listened respectfully, but her answer was immediate. "I appreciate the confidence, sir, but my answer is the same as it was 6 months ago. I have the job I want." Williams smiled, the expression of someone who had expected that response but needed to make the offer anyway. "I thought you'd say that, but I had to try. The aviation industry is safer because of people like you, whether you're wearing a federal badge or an airline uniform." As the flight continued toward Los Angeles, Sarah reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. She had started as a federal agent pursuing criminals across international boundaries, evolved into a flight attendant serving coffee and ensuring passenger comfort, and discovered that both jobs were really the same mission: taking care of people. The aircraft landed safely, passengers disembarked with smiles and thanks, and Sarah began preparing for the next flight. Tomorrow would bring another route, new passengers, and the continuing opportunity to serve in the way that felt most meaningful to her. Sometimes the most important work happens without recognition, performed by people who choose service over status, impact over income, and meaning over medals. Sarah Chen had learned that lesson at 35,000 feet, surrounded by passengers who trusted her with their lives, whether they knew her full story or not. And every time Flight 447 pushed back from the gate, she carried that responsibility with quiet pride, knowing that the safest place those passengers could be was in the care of someone who had dedicated her life to bringing everyone home. Thank you for joining us at Hidden Legends. If Sarah's story moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember that everyday heroes walk among us, often invisible until the moment they step forward to protect what matters most. Tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and who are the unsung heroes in your community? Until next time, remember, legends aren't always the loudest people in the room. Sometimes they're quietly serving coffee, keeping watch, and making sure everyone gets home safe at the end of the day. Keep your eyes open. The next legend you meet might be checking your ticket, demonstrating safety procedures, or simply doing the work that keeps your world running safely, one flight at a time.